Welcome back to Washington Journal. We're here in our final segment this morning with Webster Hubbell, former Associate Attorney General with the Department of Justice, who's just written a new book that's just in the bookstores now called Friends in High Places. You can see his picture here on the cover with his former law partner at the Rose Law Firm, Hillary Clinton, and his former golf buddy, Bill Clinton. This is I just finished reading this book, and it is fascinating, compelling, but it's also very tough to read sometimes because it's, I think as the New York Times described it, as kind of a modern American tragedy. You began in Little Rock as a lawyer at the Rose Law Firm, and were also the mayor of Little Rock for a while. And at the same time, for a short period of time, 4 or 5 months, I think you even served as Chief Justice of the Arkansas State Supreme Court. And then when your friend Bill Clinton was elected president, he asked you to come to Washington. You did. You became either number 3 or number 4?
Number 3 at the Justice Department.
Number 3 at the Justice Department. And then the roof fell in, and you ended up resigning, and here you are today after having served 21 months in a federal prison in Halfway House.
Right.
You can no longer practice law, and your friends, the Clintons, and along with many other of your old friends, no longer speak to you, or you haven't spoken to them in a long time. And I wanted to ask you why that is, but before I do that, let me ask you to describe what happened in the interim. How did you get from point A to point B?
Well, as I described in the book, starting in about 1988, I had built up debt over debt, and was in such a situation, such a tight, and wasn't able to talk to anyone. And time came that I was paying my bills, paying credit card bills, and I started using my law firm's checks to start paying personal expenses as well as firm expenses. Probably the first time was a time when, I had a credit card bill that had half personal expenses and half business expenses, and I wrote a firm check for the entire amount. It was wrong. I knew it at the time, and I just felt like I'd be able to pay it back, and then the cycle started spinning. I committed a crime, and ultimately it caught up with me.
It ended up being quite a lot of money.
Yes, it did. I didn't stop. I always thought I was going to stop, but I didn't. And by the time I left Washington, it was a considerable amount of money. And then I actually didn't even know how much it was until, as I say in the book, everything came down.
$300,000-$400,000 at the end of the day. When you were asked to come to Washington, you must have thought, geez, I'm not the kind of guy who wants to go through an FBI background check. I mean, with this hanging out there, I know you say in the book you were a little worried about that. Did you have serious misgivings about coming to Washington because of that?
I did, and yet I couldn't say no. My friends had asked me to come. How could I explain to them that I had something in my background I couldn't talk to anybody about? I mean, I had hid it from everybody. And so, as a lot of people who start to do something wrong, they become trapped and couldn't find a way out. I was wrong to do that. I was a good lawyer to about all my clients except myself.
Now, what finally happened was I think some of your partners discovered these irregularities.
That's right.
And had you not come to Washington, do you think that you would have been in the clear? Could you have made it right? Could you have covered it up? Whatever.
A lot of people talk about that and say I shouldn't, if I hadn't come, then it never would have happened. When I start to do that, when I start to think about that, I feel like prison helped me. The whole experience helped me. I finally got this out. And so I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about it because I was wrong. I should have been caught. And the best thing that happened to me was being caught and getting, paying my debt to society and hopefully now being able to pay back my law firm.
As I said, it's a very fascinating book in terms of talking about the politics of Little Rock and a portrait of Hillary Clinton when she was a young lawyer, a variety of other things. There's some very emotional moments in the book, and the one I'm curious to know, and then we'll move on, that the worst moment for you in all of this seems to me, from reading the book, to have been when you had to tell your kids what had happened, finally come clean with them.
Yes, it was. It was, it was telling your children that you've committed a crime was the hardest thing in the world I ever had to do, and I've gone through some tough times. A friend of mine told me, he said, Webb, don't be afraid to tell your children, and he said, what's wrong? And I said, well, that my children think I'm perfect, that I'm the perfect father. And he said, perfect parents are the worst form of child abuse. Tell them the truth and let them ask every question and tell them the truth. And ultimately, it brought us together, made us stronger. My daughter has actually written about that time of how now she feels like she doesn't have to be perfect as well to earn my love. So it's been a good experience, but a very painful one.
You ended up resigning in March of 1994.
Right.
And then in November of 1994, you pled guilty to a couple of charges brought by Kenneth Starr, the Whitewater prosecutor. Now, that's raised a lot of questions in people's minds. Number one, did this have anything to do with Whitewater?
It didn't have a thing to do with Whitewater. It certainly was investigated by the independent counsel as part of his overall investigation. As soon as the law firm went public with going to the Bar Association, it had to be investigated by somebody, and the independent counsel took it over. But it has nothing to do with Whitewater.
Now, there are a couple of questions that have been raised in the interim. Number one, from March of '94 to November of '94, you made about $400,000 or $500,000, give or take, as an independent consultant. And there's your critics and people who would like to attack you say that is clear evidence that there was hush money. That Webb Hubbell knew something about Bill and Hillary Clinton that Kenneth Starr needed to know that would get them in trouble on Whitewater, and he was, in effect, paid in roundabout way, indirect way with these contracts to keep quiet about it.
It wasn't hush money. I was doing work for clients. People were helping me get work who knew I was down and out and needed the work. And plus, I didn't hush. I agreed to cooperate with Kenneth Starr when I pled guilty in December. Nobody knew I was going to plead guilty. My friends were urging me to fight it even when the word got out I was about to be indicted. So nobody knew I had committed a crime. They didn't want to believe that Webb Hubbell had done something wrong. But then I began to answer questions. As part of my plea agreement, I answered questions not only by Kenneth Starr for 7 months, but every independent counsel that's in office right now, as well as congressional committees. And even after I went to prison, I was subpoenaed on numerous occasions to come to Congress and again to grand juries, and have answered every question they have put to me.
I'm told by Whitewater aficionados who really know this thing backwards and forwards, when I said I was going to be talking to you, they said, well, you have to ask him. Apparently Ken Starr still thinks he knows something, that he's holding back, and he's looking at potentially more charges. Is that true? Well, that's a two-part question.
I know that they're investigating this hush money allegation. I knew as soon as it was raised in Congress, he would have to. That's the mentality of Washington, is that everything has to be investigated. Every I has to be crossed. Every T has to be crossed. Every I has to be dotted. That's just the way things work here. I knew it was going to happen, but no, I'm not going to be indicted.
There are no more, you don't anticipate any more charges that could send you back to jail or get you in legal trouble?
I do not.
Okay. Tell me one more thing, and then I think we'll take some calls here, but how are you living now? What are you doing?
I'm working at the National Center on Institutions and Alternatives in Alexandria. It's a institution that has been here for a long time that works on criminal justice reform, prison reform. We're working right now on reforming the federal sentencing guidelines and looking at more humane treatment for elderly prisoners.
Do you hear from any of your old friends at all? Do you see them? Do you run into them? Are you tempted to call them or write them? Or?
Well, certainly I can't see the President or First Lady. I mean, that would be front page news. Again, it would be wrong of me to attempt to, and I used to be the person at the Justice Department who would advise the President who he could be seen with. And I'm a person he cannot right now, he can't talk to. A lot of friends here in Washington that were close friends are also in the same boat. If they were to take me out to dinner, you know, there would be an investigation. They'd get a subpoena the next day. So in a lot of ways, most of my high-profile friends have to stay away right now. It's lonely, it's tough, but I also have good friends back in Arkansas and people who are out of the limelight who've stuck with me through this time.
Do you see this ending?
I do see it ending. I thought it would end when I left prison. I thought it would end, you know, this summer. I thought it would end several times, but it just seems to keep going.
Let's take a call from Fairfax, Virginia, calling on the Democratic line. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I was a Democrat, encouraged about Mr. Clinton in 1992. However, what I've seen in the meantime has really alienated me from the party. And, you know, Mr. Hubbell, I understand lives change and hopefully things can turn around. But I'd just like to hear you comment on what, you know, Mr. Clinton and the gang that came in has really done to the Democratic Party. I mean, I think you've inflicted a grain amount of harm. Not you personally, maybe, but this over obsession with money. It was something we used to criticize the Republicans about, being greedy and going after money all the time. And here we have Clinton, $50,000 coffees. And I know if you dare say, and please don't say everybody does it, that's one of the lamest excuses. I think it's a disservice to Democrats when Democrats just come back and say, oh, the Republicans raise money so we can violate rules, or we can violate ethics, or we can do this, we can do that, because our cause is righteous and the Republicans are evil. That does nothing for us. Look what's happened. We lost the Senate. We lost the House, 35 governors. I just think it's a shame, this over-obsession with money. I think it shows just as much greed as anything else. And I also think, in some sense, it's worse.
Okay, caller. Thank you.
Well, I think, first of all, I shouldn't have come to Washington, although I think I did a very good job at the Justice Department, and I enjoyed it, and I think by most accounts I did do a good job. I shouldn't have come. I hurt the president, I hurt the First Lady, I hurt my friends, and I certainly hurt the party. And that's something I addressed in the book, and I'm apologetic for. At the same time, I think Bill Clinton feels like a lot of Democrats, and obviously you do, that there is too much money in the electoral system. Money is too important, and there should be something done about it. I think the people right before me were talking about that as well, and that there should be an honest debate among the parties about how do we reduce the influence of money on the political process.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like? One of the interesting parts of your book was describing what it was like to work at the Rose Law Firm early. You were an associate there and then a partner along with Vince Foster, who also came to Washington with you. And the two of you became close, but never so close as when Hillary Rodham at the time, showed up as a young partner, the first woman at the firm. Your portrait of both Hillary Rodham and Vince Foster was a compelling one. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, we all were young litigators in what at that time was a big firm for Arkansas, but a small law firm for the country. And we became very close. We worked together on cases. We'd go out to lunch together. And Hillary was breaking ground every time she'd do something within the firm. Obviously, she was not only the first female associate, she was the first female partner, the first woman to become pregnant at the firm, and how we dealt with that. In some ways, people forget how far women have come in the last 20 years, and some of the things she was subjected to, both within the firm and within the state, are fascinating to me to look back on. And in some ways, what she had to put up with. Vince was a wonderful lawyer, perfectionist. He was old before his time, so to speak. And yet I tried to talk about what a wonderful father he was, what a wonderful husband he was, and how much fun he had, and how much fun the three of us had going on these lunches and taking trips together and enjoying each other's company.
You paint a portrait of him in the book that the reader gets a sense of foreboding. Of course, he ended up committing suicide, or that. There's still some controversy about that, but I feel, from having read your account, that you feel there's absolutely no doubt about that at all.
There's no doubt about it. We obviously, when it happened, didn't want to believe it. He was the man you wouldn't believe would commit suicide because he was so strong. But yet, in writing the book, you can go back now and look at things that you should have seen. It's something I talk about a lot, is the fact that depression is a disease and that we don't know enough about it. We're not schooled to look for it and know how to help our friends when they are suffering from depression.
Let's take another call from Washington, D.C. on the Republican line. You're on the air.
Mr. Hubble, this is not so much a question so much as a comment. You did mention your family earlier. I am a Republican and part of this machine that we call Washington. And your son is an outstanding individual. I got to know him through a good friend of mine at the University of the South at Swanee, Tennessee. And he's an outstanding individual. And I like to think that, tomatoes don't fall too far from the vine, if you know what I'm saying. I'd like to hear your comment about that.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very proud of my son and my 3 daughters, but he is a special young man, and thank you very much.
We've got another call coming in from Washington, D.C., this time on the independent line. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Hi, Mr. Hubble. How are you?
Fine.
I want you to know that I'm a supporter of you and a supporter of Clinton, so this question is not from a derogatory standpoint, but I did want to ask you, I read the New York Times profile on you, I guess it was about a week ago, and the way that they describe, the way they characterize you, is as having had kind of a split regarding the Rose law firm funds, that even though you were aware that you had used these funds, that you were behaving as if you hadn't in order to kind of hold on to a lifestyle. Fairly or not, that's how they characterized it. And I'm wondering, in your view, from where you sit now, to what extent does that kind of split between behavior and knowledge characterize the president and some of the other folks who are currently involved in embroiled in campaign finance issues? And I'd be very interested in your comments on that. Thank you.
That's an interesting question. I can only really address my conduct first, is that it was wrong. I stepped over the line and couldn't get back. I think we've talked about this already, is that the use of money in the political process is becoming very dangerous. And I think there needs to be an honest discussion by both parties on money and politics, or there's going to be a huge divide in the country ultimately. I talk about that divide when I talk about the prison system, but I think it can occur in politics as well.
You worked for Janet Reno for about a year, a little more than a year probably. You know her pretty well. According to your account in the book, you got along very well. She's now facing a very difficult decision. She has been described, I think there are a lot of Republicans who think she's in the tank for the president. There are a lot of people who know her, say they know her, who say she's ferociously independent. She would never do anything that she didn't think was absolutely right for, just to curry favor with her political superior. Are you of that school? I assume you are, that you think she's pretty independent. And if you think that, can you give us an example? Can you give us any anecdote or any kind of thing that would give us an insight any time she acted independently against her own interest?
Well, I do believe she's ferociously independent. And I also want to comment on the fact that the career lawyers at the Justice Department are ferociously independent as well. I've got to know a lot of them when I was there. And, you know, I came in skeptical and got to know them pretty well and found them to be not only independent, but really care about their country and the government. There's a lot of good people who are career lawyers at the Justice Department who devoted their life, could be out making a lot more money, who devoted their life to the Justice Department and justice in America. So I don't believe there's anywhere in the country you can find a more independent counsel or an independent staff than at the Justice Department here in Washington. So I'm trying to think of examples. I know there were times, you know, that the White House was trying to push her as far as policy was concerned. And if she knows, she believes she's doing the right thing, you aren't going to push Janet Reno, one way or the other, whether it's from Capitol Hill or whether it's from the White House. She's going to do what she thinks is right. I was glad to see she went home for Thanksgiving, because I know she kind of gets refreshed when she goes back to Miami and kind of takes her shoes off and walks the beach. And I suspect when she comes back, she'll make the decision that she thinks is right for the country and won't be influenced either way.
According to your book, she got in bad odor with the White House pretty quickly there. In fact, right after Waco, I think.
That Waco, in some ways, it certainly was a tragedy, but in some ways she was viewed as fiercely independent and strong-willed, and so there were people, not the president and not Mac McClarty, but there were, I think, young staffers at the White House who began to become jealous of the popularity of Janet Reno, and so all of a sudden there are rumors that they're at odds at the White House, and I had to play the role of going back and forth trying to heal the wound, so to speak.
Madison, Wisconsin, calling on the Democratic line, you're on the air with a question for Webb Hubble.
Thank you very much for taking my call. Mr. Hubble, I just finished your book, and this is really, truly a gift for me to speak with you.
Thank you.
Your honesty and your reflection over your life and that of your family was really, truly inspirational to me. I want to say to you that Vince Foster's death had meaning in my life. I had a very successful international business, and something happened, and that was depression. I lost everything. And I went and got help the week after Vince Foster took his life because of people like you who spoke up and talked about the fact that Vince Foster had been experiencing depression. And I didn't want my life to end the same way. And I want you to know that there are people out here who really did take meaning from that. And your honesty will go down. Your book will go down as one of the most honest books about political life I think that there's ever been written. And thank you so much, and good luck to you and to your family. We really are praying for you.
Thank you very much.
We've got another call from nearby Frederick, Maryland on the Republican line. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Hubble.
Good morning.
I have not had the opportunity to read your book, but it's been said that you mentioned in your book that the president asked you to see if there were aliens and who killed JFK. Is there any truth to that?
He did. I mean, I've enjoyed everybody's reaction to that. I mean, I think everybody wants to know, are there UFOs and who really shot JFK? But yes, the president one day asked me to find that out while I was at the Justice Department.
Now, well, you got to go a little farther than that. I mean, apparently you did. You went to NORAD and asked them if there were UFOs. And did they look at you funny when you asked that question?
Well, they say they get that question all the time, and of course there aren't UFOs. And I did go to the FBI and ask them if I could have a look at their files. And there's huge file rooms. I actually have a photograph of all the files on it. But I wasn't there long enough to convince myself of the answers.
So do you keep an open mind on the UFO question?
Absolutely.
Let's take another call on the independent line from New York City for Webb Hubble. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I've heard you on a WNYC program here in New York, being interviewed about your book, and you mentioned one of the things you wanted to bring out. I haven't read your book yet, but one of the things you wanted to bring out was Hillary Clinton's good humor. And here I see you've talked about Vincent Foster's strength and strength of character, and it just doesn't ring true, sir. I think it was all over the press that if one of the factors of Vince Foster's depression was that he had been left out in the cold by Hillary Clinton, that she had been very curt with him, and that he had essentially wound up seeing himself as a bagman for the Clintons. And furthermore, there's been all sorts of rumors about a romantic relationship between them. And here you are, sort of looking as if you could play Lurch in Hollywood. But I think that's just, and therefore what you say is honest. But I think you're just a slick one. I don't think you're telling the truth. I think you know a hell of a lot more than you're telling. I'd like to know what the final situation was between Hillary Clinton and Vincent Foster.
Well, I hope you will read the book. I mean, I think you shouldn't judge me or anyone else till you have read the book. But I do talk about their relationship, both as in Arkansas and in Washington, and the pressures that were on Vince. But I've learned a lot about the disease of depression, and you never know what tips someone over the edge. You can understand stress, you can understand pressures and differences in relationship, but the disease is very complex. And like the woman who got help, we need to be able to see the symptoms and try to deal with them.
I've got a couple of faxes here for you.
Okay.
Let's start with the first one. Mr. Hubble, were you not at Martha's Vineyard at the same time as Mr. Clinton, and did you meet with him or communicate with him or staff? I don't know when the time frame here. I know you describe in the book going up there, but that was before all this happened.
Right. I heard this story that somehow it was this summer that I was at Martha's Vineyard. at the same time the president was, and attended his birthday. I was not at Martha's Vineyard at the same time the president was. I didn't go to Martha's Vineyard. What I think may have led to the confusion is a friend of mine lent me a house in Cape Cod, and I was in Cape Cod at about the same time the president was in Martha's Vineyard, but I didn't see him. I haven't seen him since October of 1994, and haven't talked to him since Thanksgiving of that same year.
No communication, no written communication with him either?
I can't.
Yeah, he hasn't sent you a note or anything?
He can't.
Yeah. Even the one that would go through the prison censors, huh? Here's another one. If I were able to get through on the phone line, I would ask Mr. Hubble this: why did he refuse the committee's subpoena? You talk about going before quite a few committees. Like Susan McDougal's refusal to testify before the grand jury, his refusal just doesn't make sense. To simply appear and tell the truth seems such an obvious response to quell criticisms and clear the record, and refusing in both cases gives the unmistakable impression that there are secrets and schemes that, if revealed, would be detrimental to Ms. McDougal, Mr. Hubble, and the President and First Lady. What is the rational basis for not appearing?
Well, I think what he's asking about is the current investigation that is going on, not only by Judge Starr, but Congress with regard to my clients. And as I've said before, I'm not going to talk about my clients. I felt then that they hired me on a confidential basis. You don't hire a lawyer expecting them to go on national TV or anywhere else, before Congress or anywhere else, and talk about what you do for your clients. I feel very strongly about that. I feel very strongly about the principle that a person ought to be able to consult a lawyer without having to read about it in the press or have the lawyer go on TV and talk about it.
Let's take one more call from Needles, California on the Democratic line. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you very much for C-SPAN. I really enjoy it every morning. I have a question for you, Mr. Hubble. You say the Justice Department is totally independent and all that, and yet every attorney was fired when Clinton took over, and they hired all attorneys when they wanted to put people in there that they want. And when you say Waco probably was a tragedy, believe me, it was a tragedy. When you kill 20 children and put gas them to death and burn them up and shoot them, I think that's pretty much a tragedy. And when people... Vince Foster, if you read the actual thing on Vince Foster, there's no way that I will ever believe that Vince Foster murdered himself. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope you don't get me wrong. Waco was a tragedy. It's something that I live with. I know Janet Reno lives with, and anybody involved in the decision lives with. And it's still very difficult for me to talk about it, but I do write about what happened in the book. I hope in no way did I mean to minimalize the tragedy that occurred at Waco. I hope you understand. I believe what you're talking about firing the attorneys was that, yes, after Janet Reno was appointed, like in most administrations, the political appointees, that being the U.S. attorneys, and the political appointees at the Justice Department were asked to submit their resignations, and new U.S. attorneys were appointed. And I was a part of that and talk about it. What I was talking about, the independence, is not the U.S. attorneys, but the career Justice Department lawyers, people who've been working there 20 and 30 years, who've dedicated their lives to justice in America.
Well, Hubble, thanks very much for coming in this morning. Appreciate it. And to our viewers, have a great week.